in our last session. My name is Sithabile Mathe. I'm a practicing architect. My company is called Moralo Designs. I'm also chair of the Architects Registration Council, and I'm also chair of the Botswana Housing Corporation board. I'm keenly interested in the development of our profession, the development of how we train our professionals, and the growth of the industry in general. So I'm going to take us to our first speaker, Mayor Sethebe, if I can hand over to you. Thank you. Don't forget to unmute your mic.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Sita. I'm just gonna share my screen now. Is it visible to everybody?
Yes, it is.
It is visible.
Okay, great. Again, thank you, Sita, and to Bowiko and Minnacle Academy for organizing such a relevant conversation at this time. Just going to start. So my portion for today is to share and discuss on these very popular words that have been discussed a lot in the past couple of years and more relevantly this year, which is the fourth industrial revolution and the built environment, currently our economic crisis or just the global economic crisis, and then the digital and broader technology revolution that we are experiencing, and rather what to do with it in the built environment. I want to first talk about what 4IR is globally and what it is in the built environment, and dispel the notion that 4IR is some far-fetched invention that we need to strive for as a country and that our economy cannot achieve it because we believe government is not doing enough. First, we are already in the fourth industrial revolution because it is characterized by the use of technology. Oh, just a bit there. I need to get, yes. It is characterized by the use of technology, and this is evident in the way we live our lives even before COVID-19. What has happened more recently, and for me, I feel it's fortunate, is that we have been forced to recognize the value of technology and its capability in our everyday life. Hopefully, we will move away from our traditional methods of doing things, especially those that do not achieve efficiency or waste time and resources, which is what we would be able to establish. So for me, 4IR is not a time in the future, it is now. And what it does in the built environment is what we need to establish ourselves. We need to view what challenges we have had and identify the existing solutions that technology offers us and opportunities to build solutions that are relevant in our environment. Keep trying to change the screen. So I'll give an example of what I think our country has suffered in terms of major challenges in the built environment, especially in provision of infrastructure. And for us, it's either time, we don't have enough time for certain things, we don't have enough money for certain things, and you're always concerned about quality. I want to challenge the built environment to consider the role we have in delivering solutions in this time of 4IR, if one would say. Do we still need to have our plans take up to 6 weeks for planning or building approval when there are so many collaboration tools that incorporate comments and approval levels and continued communication online or digitally? Do we still need to have buildings that take 12 to 18 months, and this is if you are lucky for them to be completed, when there's 3D printing, which can afford us guaranteed quality, reduced time, and fluidity of design? Do we need to be physically anywhere to do our inspections when we can virtually transport ourselves in different locations in seconds with augmented and virtual reality? Do we need to be calculating or analyzing numbers, assessing risk and scenarios when artificial intelligence and machine learning affords us the ability to duplicate our expertise and experience increasing our production levels by more than 1,000 factor with much more accuracy and consistency than any human being is able to do. So can we do it? And for us, Advantage Properties, we have walked the journey and have been able to deliver a valuation platform, which we believe is an industry solution and solves certain issues that existed with regards to availability of information, professionals' cost of service, audit trail payments, and things like that. This has been a well-received industry solution. And for us, we have no doubt, or I have no doubt, that as a country, more and more solutions of this nature and even better can be produced. If we want to solve our problems, we can be able to solve them without any international consultant needing to help us. I know that as I talk about 4IR and technology and all of that, and we're looking at this economic crisis, there's a thought that is tinkering in your mind about whether I'm advocating for us to lose our jobs. In the times of this crisis, am I saying we should even attack the little jobs that we have and threaten our livelihood? And for me, that is not really what it is. I'm saying it is a new season that requires a new way of thinking. This time, people are not factors of production. They are benefactors of production. I want to challenge you to consider why we do work. I took the time to go into the history of the organization of work, and the upcoming of work itself was simply what society structured the activities and labor that was necessary for survival. Work was basically created as essential in providing our basic physical needs of food, clothing, and shelter. And now we have added more and more factors that we believe are essential to our living. In 4IR, if we use technology to do what we deem as work for production, that leads to the provision of those basic needs and more that we believe we need. If all of that is taken care of, it allows us to lead the lives that are not anchored on work. We are at the beginning of a new time and the end of an era where economies are changing and disrupted. Capitalism will be disturbed because what has become and will continue to become more important to us as a people is the value that we give to the next person. And that collaboration to achieve better for the greater good becomes more important. I'm a hopeless optimist. That's why I can go into technology and the built environment, all of the things that generally go wrong. But it's because I believe in humanity realizing that we can achieve more when we work together than when we compete. Something that I believe our forefathers knew very, very well. The way business used to operate is over. The cultures we have built will all fall away when the essentiality of business and your survival becomes apparent. There's no more time for time-wasting habits and activities. We need to be looking for real solutions. We need to be providing accommodation for our people, safe, healthy accommodation across the board, and live lives that we deserve. So yes, as a way forward, I would say, yes, the economy will continue to change. Even the use of money as we know it will probably change, but we will survive. We will have a new economy, it will be digital. So in terms of how we deal with economic crisis, put on your gloves and your mask and get ready for a great ride as far as I'm concerned. So what does 4IR or the evolution look like, or the future of it look like? For me, I believe it talks about cleaner building methods, because we're going to spend more time rather in our homes and in other safer environments than in our offices. Faster development timelines, more meaningful work, mindful building and sustainability, informed innovation and limited possibilities. Because with technology, you have information at your hands, and when you have sufficient information in your hands, your possibilities are unlimited. For some, we may need to hang our hard hats. Are we ready to hang our hard hats and work from our devices of choice from anywhere in the world? I cannot help but get excited because 3 years ago, when we discussed the average person working for 4 hours a week, it sounded like an unfathomable feat. But now we can very well see it after a lot of us have spent more than 40 days working from home. Once we establish collaboration tools, automation of manual, calculation, and repetitive work, there would be no need for you to be there as a human being, apart from providing perhaps guidance to the machine in areas that it may not have cognizance of decision making. If we get it right, it would mean increased productivity, giving back more time for human beings to fulfill other mindful activities. So we must not be afraid. We must embrace the change and prepare our lives to live better, more fulfilling lifestyles. So for me, I would say in 4IR digital economy, or rather economic crisis, welcome to the new normal. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Sethebe. I think it's a very interesting thing that you are talking about technology, but you're also raising that very fundamental fear that a lot of us, I think, have. Most of us in our profession have been trained in, the very manual aspects of the service that we deliver. I remember when AutoCAD came on board and people were saying, it means that we will no longer need architects. And of course, in today, several years later, the technology has moved on to ArchiCAD, to Revit, to very many things, but the profession itself is still in need. So I find it, I would encourage people not to look at the advent of technology as something, as you say, that's going to wipe their existence away. Our next speaker is going to be speaking to issues of leadership, within the built environment. How do we lead ourselves to a space and a place where there is actual real value in what we deliver as professionals, real value, there's growth, there's innovation, there's new ideas around how we deliver what we do. Clare, can I hand over to you, and if you can talk us through this very exciting topic, these learnings from this difficult time that we've seen ourselves going through recently. Thank you.
Thank you, Sita. I guess I also have to share my screen, but in the meantime, can I thank everyone who has actually organized this event. It is very, very interesting to see how sometimes we converge in thinking. I'm not saying that I'm going to be speaking to what Sethebe talked to. I'm trying to share my screen. Can you see my screen? Can somebody talk to me?
Not yet.
Okay, let me just end my show and start all over again. Is it anything visible there?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. My topic is actually very interesting because it doesn't only talk to maybe a certain sector in the economy, it talks to everyone. We are all really moving away from a very tough and challenging time or phase in our lives as leaders. I assume that we are leaders, and we have to now start looking into how can we move forward? How are we going to get our organizations to move forward? So the first thing that really we need to understand is, historically, challenge for leaders is to manage the crisis while you are actually also building a future for other people. So it's not only for you as a person as an organization is how do I make sure that my organization exists, but I also make sure that the people that I work with, the people that I collaborate with, my employees are actually getting value for the services that I give. And what does the future really look like for me? So as we move from responding to COVID-19, leaders in organizations, leaders outside the organizations, presidents, ministers, they have to shift from thinking about today to tomorrow. What is going to happen tomorrow? And we responded. The COVID-19 came, we responded, we stayed at home, we worked, if you did. Some didn't manage to work because we were not prepared to work from home. That was a phase. Now we have to prepare ourselves to go back to our new normal. I call it a new normal because I don't see us going back to what we used to actually be doing. We have to go face those uncertainties. Yes, we are opening the economy, we are going outside our homes. Who knows, we might be back next week. I'm not jinxing anything, but we might be back next week. We have to go face our uncertainties. You know, as leaders, we now need to be looking back and asking ourselves, how is our followership? Did we really do enough to develop leaders within our organizations who can help us to move on? We need to actually nurture and build greater trust, because people have to now know whether we are going to be able to move, on with them, or are we going to leave them behind? We need to anticipate what success looks like post-COVID. Nobody knows what is going to happen tomorrow or next week or next month, but we have to go back and anticipate what is going to happen. We need to define organizational goals to achieve that. How does the picture look like post-COVID? How do we expect to move on? We need to guide our people and facilitate them to sprint there, because unfortunately we are already existing. We can't afford not to sprint. And we have to build resilient organizations. The question now is, what is resilience? It's definitely not the one that can simply go back to where we were before COVID-19. If you are thinking, I'll quickly go in and find out how I can go back to where I was, that is not resilience. Resilience is what would have transformed, and we have to build the desired attitudes, the beliefs, the agility, and structures into our DNA. We have to go back and say to ourselves, we have to recover, but where we were is not where we can be. We have to move beyond that place and move forward. Okay. And the thing about this situation is we have to shift our thinking to a very unpredictable and, that place where you have no idea how it is actually going to respond to anything that you think. So we are moving our activities from those unpredictable, frenetic activities to response, where it was about, we have to go back. We have to go home. We have to work from home. We have to provide internet. We have to make sure that people can work and access our networks from outside. We have to ensure that our stakeholders can actually be able to contact us even when we are in lockdown. Now, we are going into our new normal, where leaders need to envision the picture of recovery. We have to now ask ourselves, how are we going to recover? Focus is now from ensuring employee safety and business operational continuity to the outside. We have to continue serving our stakeholders. What are our stakeholders expecting from us? How are we going to serve them rather than our internal processes? We're no longer going to just manage the crisis or keeping the organization running. We have to manage the transition as well. So you can imagine how taxing that is going to be. It is now time for project recovery. And with dedicated, skilled resources, some of them may not be the same resources that you used for response because all of us have our own leadership abilities. There are people who can respond and act on a crisis and do everything quickly, but they are not able to take you forward. You have to live with that. Planning is not about contingency anymore. You require people who can assist your organization to craft long-term economic and scenario plans. And as I was saying earlier on to somebody, scenario planning is about guessing. You are taking consideration of impact on operations, on staff, on budget, on what you think your stakeholders are going to actually require from you. And you have to align everything to that. And yet you are not even sure your guess is right. Leadership attitude has to change from reactive to that of anticipation. Anticipation to rebuild. You need to look at how you're going to influence and energize and inspire your people to embrace the vision we have for the future. Remember, this vision is something that you are also anticipating and trying to draw in your own head, but at the same time, you have to make other people come on board and, you know, run to that destination with you. You need to remember, very, very importantly, you need to remember trust has to be actually built, because if your people don't trust you, if your stakeholders don't trust you, chances of you influencing them to think differently about you is going to be very, very difficult. And the shift that we envisaged just before COVID-19 hit us, you know, we knew construction could take years, 28 months, 50, 5 years, 6 years. You wouldn't build a 20-story building in 2 days, in 5 days, in 10 days. But, you know, it was amazing how China showed us that you can actually, because when they had to respond to COVID-19, they built 2 hospitals in less than 2 weeks. I think everybody was like, we are waiting to see how that is going to actually pan out. Pan out it did. Yes, I hear there were some problems afterwards, but if it was for response to COVID-19, it actually served its purpose. It is important to judge your timing moving from response to recovery, because it is not everybody who is going to recover at the same time. All of us went into our lockdowns at different stages in our organizations, where technology probably wasn't very good in some organizations. Some organizations were right there. They had already started working from home long before COVID-19. So your moving to the recovery has to also be timed well. As a leader, there's this law, John Maxwell, that says that the law of timing. It is very, very important for a leader to know when to do certain things, else you may miss an opportunity. And this depends on the impact of COVID to your business, as I've said, what your business model looked like before you went COVID-19. If your business model was such that you had multinational collaborations, you had people that you were working with outside Botswana, and they have been hard hit or less hit, you have to now start asking yourselves, how can we, start that particular collaboration again and keep our organizations moving forward without really now taxing the other one who probably is not ready to assist you. Media and technology companies have suffered less impact, so they may be able to recover quicker. And there is no one size fits all for anybody. And in my last slide, I am trying to actually say to people, like, everything about COVID-19, the threats, the old roadmaps are not actually going to work. You need reliable, unique, and rethinking of what is going to have to happen. Recover, you have to think about, do you want to recover and grow revenues? If you in the built environment, biggest stakeholder is government, can you anticipate what government is thinking about right now to recover the economy? Is it going to be infrastructure development or maintenance and going into IT projects, agility is key in decision making right now. So you have to actually know that your customers have changed in terms of how they think going forward. They want different service from what they had pre-COVID-19. I guess I've given you, an insight into the kind of thinking our leaders have to have, in managing COVID-19 post activities. And I'll be open for questions moving forward. Thank you very much, Sita, for the time.
Oh, thank you very much, Claire, for that. I mean, one of the things that you and I have spoken about that has really stuck in my mind is this issue of sustainability of our practices, within the built environment and even businesses in general. One of the most distressing things for me during this time was the discovery that there are so many businesses that do not survive beyond a month, with a month without being at work or billing, or means that your business grinds to a halt and you're unable to support your staff and to support the overall business obligations that business and financial obligations that you have. So it is about leadership. It is about our leaders within the profession, our leaders within politics, and our leaders in the society at large, taking that step and saying what needs to be done to create sustainable practices over and above what we have at the moment. What is our long-term strategic thinking around sustainability of practice? So our next speaker is Kagiso Sebetso, who is talking about something that, in my view, has been neglected. It has been neglected in the past in the built environment, given very little attention. And I think that the period of time that we have had leading up to the time around COVID, going through this lockdown phase and coming out of it, one of the key things is what is our thinking around issues of sustainability and issues of green building. It's a neglected aspect that I think if we don't take cognizance of what a positive impact this can have, not only in terms of the sustainability of practice, but the sustainability of the environment that we have, then we as a people are really doing ourselves a disservice. So, Kagiso, I'm going to hand over to you to talk us through this. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can all hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I know that there's a problem with my video, so if you can't see it, it's okay, we'll just carry on. Yeah, I'm going to speak about the impact of COVID-19 on the landscape of the built environment. And I know that a lot of people, actually all of us are feeling the negative impact, and some of us are coming to terms with some of the positive changes that we have to make. And I think one of the positive changes that we have to make as an industry is that COVID-19 is really pulling us to from being just the built environment to being the green built environment. And that is something that I'm passionate about. It's something that really excites me. So I hope that some of that passion will be contagious this afternoon. So, a lot of people, when they hear the words green building, they kind of get lost. It's like, what on earth are you talking about? What is a green building? Our buildings are great as they are. And some people kind of reference, first world countries who are doing well in that aspect. And they think, well, that is such an unattainable aspect. And if I can just give it to you in a nutshell and say that a green building is basically an efficient building. And So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what does it mean to have a building that is efficient. We know about efficient cars, efficient systems and machines, but what is an efficient building? It's basically a building that works well, and this is how we can tell. So your building is efficient if it uses relatively low energy and has relatively low water consumption. And in that, we're talking about, typically we see that in our electricity bills and in our water bills. And the energy is consumed through our lighting and also through the heating and cooling systems that we use. And those also use water in commercial spaces and so on. And just the way that we use water in our buildings. Another way that we can tell that a building is efficient is the fact that it's self-sustainable and that it relies on renewable energy sources. Okay, so what that means is that, say we have a power cut. Okay, what does that mean if, you know, for your building? Is it going to carry on working when we run out of coal? When, you know, there's load shedding, is your building going to carry on? If it is a self-sustainable building and it's efficient and it uses renewable energy sources, of course it will carry on working. The third way to tell is that a building has a really good relationship with the environment. So what that means is that it's not harmful for the environment, and buildings can be harmful for the environment through things like pollution and the waste that we produce during construction phase. So I like what Sethebe spoke about in terms of the way that we do construction is going to change. So that would be very exciting to see. And another way, last way for this presentation, is the quality of the indoor environment. So it's not too hot, not too cold, the lighting is good, and not all lighting is artificial. You can enjoy some natural lighting without glare and so on. You can look out the window and see some greenery. Okay, so now then the question is, well, how does COVID-19 take us from being just the built environment to being the green built environment? Well, let's look at some of the things we've had to do to adapt and how that will influence the way that buildings will look and how they'll be designed. This is something that also excites me. So, for example, we've had to live with social distancing, we've had to have digitalization of businesses and services, and we've had to work remotely, right? So during this time, our buildings have been sitting empty, our big buildings that have, you know, we've used so much concrete on them, so many building materials. We've got all these basement parking in large volumes. Our boardrooms are sitting empty. And so that is bound to change. Okay, so the design of our buildings is going to change in size, and we're going to focus more on functionality. And gone are the days of filing and storage, big storage spaces. I've been surprised at how little I've needed to print over the last little while. And then you wonder, why have we been using so much paper in our offices when we can pack things up digitally? And educational facilities will change because of all the social distancing and so on. Residential building designs are going to change. We now need some office or working space in our own houses. Parents need some learning space for their children if children have to do school at home. So that's also an exciting aspect. But overall, what it does is that buildings are going to change in size, and they're going to become more functional than just this over-designed monster that we kind of put out there. So we will still need buildings for some sort of productivity to carry on in society. So we can agree on that. Now, how will this translate into a green built environment? Okay, so if we look at some of the changes that are happening in terms of design, we are going to use a lot less harmful building materials than we did before, such as concrete and all the other harmful ones. And I think for designers, it's going to be easier to work with aspects of natural lighting and natural ventilation when they're working with more optimal, sizable buildings. as opposed to when they're working with super large buildings. Those buildings will consume less energy because we're not trying to, you know, provide a heating and cooling system for 10,000 square meters worth of a building. We are actually now doing it for smaller spaces. And renewable energy infrastructure can now become cheaper. Trying to put up a solar power plant for 10,000 square meter building is very different and more expensive than trying to do the same for, say, a 500 square meter building. So I hope you are now excited about how this is now pushing us in that direction. It's stuff we need to be talking about. And now for our industry, the question is, how do we adapt? This is a big call for designers and builders. I think we are very privileged to still have designers who are from a generation that has experienced indigenous design, indigenous knowledge, people who have visited grandparents in the villages and so on, who have seen indigenous materials being used for buildings. And I would like to actually say that we need to start looking within our context. We need to start looking in our culture, because so often when we think of green building, we want to adapt technologies from first world countries. And it just doesn't fit here. It doesn't fit into our budget. We can learn from it, but sometimes it's not sustainable for us and it's really unattainable. And so the question is, what do we use in terms of the indigenous knowledge, technology, materials that we have? And that is something that designers and builders need to take up and combine that with international exposure that they've had. And another way is our alternative local energy sources. I laughed, you know, by myself when I wrote that organic waste part, and I was thinking we could put our cattle to good use. You know, there's so much organic waste from that we could use for biofuel, especially in residential spaces. I know of people who started using biodiesels down south in the country. And our biggest resource in Botswana that we often complain about in the summer, that being the sun. And there's a whole lot of talk about we need to start using solar power. And I think we need to start educating ourselves about it, and we need to start approaching the government more and more about it, particularly as the built environment, and saying, hey, we need to use this. And lastly, our people. I think that one of the things I appreciate about Botswana is that, you know, when it comes to this green building thing, it's not that people are not willing, it's just that people don't know. And we need to educate our society, and we need to raise an awareness in our society. And I really believe that it's something that will excite our people. And so when that happens, it means that the market is informed about an alternative way. And I really believe that they will be for it. I can't see them being against it to a large degree. And this is the market that creates demand for the designers, and they will want that, and designers will start to collaborate with them in creating something that is good for our environment. And you're wondering, but why should we go down this route? I put financial benefits at the forefront because it's an incentive for most people, in the sense that, you know, operational costs will be lower. And once we start getting into it, and once it becomes the norm, even the capital costs will go down. And secondly, energy efficiency. We want to be able to use our power well. We want to be able to not have issues of we're going to run out of coal, or, you know, we have load shedding and so on, but we want to be able to store our energy efficiently and know that we get it from the environment and that it's never going to run out. And in terms of water, we know that water is an issue in Botswana. And I met a young Botswana man who was trying to introduce the technology called hydro panels, where he harvests water from the air using solar panels. And I thought, wow, this is brilliant. You know, instead of just looking to the rain for water, are we sustainable when the rainy seasons are gone for a long while? And you know, those are things we need to start thinking about. What can we do so that we are self-sustainable as a nation? And lastly, because we actually do care about our environment, it is our heritage, and this is the legacy that we're also going to leave for the generations to come. And we actually do love our country. We have a young industry that still has a chance to get things right, as far as the environment is concerned and green buildings are concerned. So we really have a great opportunity to set an example for other areas in the region. So yeah, thank you so much. I hope that you can start thinking along those lines of, are my lights on all day? You know, or what can I do to get some natural lighting and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kagiso, for that. I mean, essentially, a lot of what we're talking about today, unfortunately, is a taster. Behind every one of our presenters for today's session is a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of tried and tested experience, and experience specific to Botswana. You know, for me, one of the most positive outcomes of us being forced into these digital communication platforms is that, on the one hand, we've been able to be incredibly inclusive. You know, it doesn't matter if you're in Francistown, you know, you can still attend the seminar, you can still, you know, participate in these gatherings. You don't have to be physically in any one place. This technology has given us an opportunity to engage across the broader aspects of our profession. And for me, this platform has also given us an opportunity to to listen and learn from, you know, members of our profession who, as I said earlier, sit on this extreme body of wealth, of knowledge that we all stand to benefit from. So, ladies, thank you very much for your input today. Everything that we've done in this session and the last one really would not have been possible without the initiative from both Minnacle Academy and also the Botswana Women in Construction. Whilst you as participants have a moment to think and direct some questions to our speakers, I'd like to give an opportunity to both Minnacle Academy and Botswana Women in Construction to talk briefly about who they are and what they offer, as it's the hard work of women like this that have brought us to where we are today. So I'll start with Minnacle Academy, and you as participants, can you please, you know, start lining up the questions to our speakers today. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Chanda from Minnacle Academy, a training institute that exists to train on built environment programs. Basically, we train and we upskill built environment practitioners. This is a great platform, and we thank all participants for coming on and for supporting this second webinar and the first one.
I get the feeling Chanda is shouting at her child at this moment.
I apologize, and these are some of the perks of working from home, and some of the things that we are going to be seeing happening. And I hope as we continue to unpack and discuss, we'll be discussing some of these things, because we are likely to see ourselves working from home more often during this year, during the COVID period. Basically, I think to just sum up, Sita, for the during the little minute that you've given us, our website is available, www.minnacleacademy.ac.bw. We've got a Facebook page also, Minnacle Academy, and we'll be, I think, advertising a lot of our programs through that platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chanda. Could I ask Minnacle to just briefly introduce Botswana Women in Construction and talk about their role in getting us to where we are today? Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining in. I hope I'm audible. Can everyone hear me?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, great. I'm Minnacle Masuku, and I'm just representing a fairly new organization called Botswana Women in Construction Organization, BOWICO. What we seek to do, can you see my screen? Let me just make it bigger for everyone to see. Okay, I think I'll leave it at that. So what our big idea is to empower women in the construction industry to really just be successful. And when we say the construction industry, and we really mean the whole value chain of construction. So if you can think of the pre-feasibility section, the feasibility, the planning, implementation, construction, and the whole building life cycle, managing buildings, the facilities, and so on. So this is where our interest lies, the whole value chain, and we'd just love more and more women to join us in our organization. And our objectives are really creating awareness, networking, mentorship, and forming strategic partnerships. As you can see, we're probably on our first objective there of creating awareness through these webinars. And we really are trying to work through some of them to just empower women, as I'd said before. Let me just share our last slide, my last slide with you. And that picture really is just about what we are. We rise by lifting each other up. You can contact us, for those who would like to join the organization, you can contact us on bw@gmail.com. Our number is 74531-224. Thank you so much for joining us. And we hope to have you on our next webinars. We shall carry on interacting with you. Thank you, Sita.
Thank you very much, Minnacle. We have a question here, and this question is directed to Kagiso. What do you think will necessitate the shift towards green practices within our local industry? So what is actually needed? What is the big push? Is it mindset? Is it money? You know, if you can briefly summarize this question to say, you know, if you are gonna, what are the big 1, 2, 3s that are gonna have to change in our local environment to move us to green practices in the built environment?
Okay, very good question. And I think the number one thing is education and awareness. And I don't mean it in the academic sense or anything like that. I believe that if the industry players, as industry players, we can educate Botswana about these building technologies or green building technologies that are available to us and accessible to us, then this will create a demand and make people recognize the need for it. I think that at the moment, for as long as people don't know how expensive it is to actually have a conventional building running in terms of water and electricity, you know, if they don't know that, then they're not going to ask for something better. They're not going to ask for something different. So I think the first thing would be that knowledge and education, just the general knowledge and education to our society to stir up that demand and to make people recognize the need for it. And I think secondly, you know, at some point, the government will have to get in on it, especially from a commercial point of view, where, you know, the commercial part of our industry is very much driven by profits and viabilities and feasibilities and so on. If people can't see how this is going to, you know, give them money, then they think, well, we'll just make money the way that we've been making it at all costs. And I think, you know, certain policies and legislation that is directed at protecting our resources and our environment will, in a way, push people or push the industry in that direction. So those are, you know, those are the two things that I could think of off the top of my head, except the last one being examples. I think as we educate and as we share the knowledge about the benefits of these things, one of the key things would be to be able to have demonstrations of saying, this is what other people are doing and this is how it benefits them, because people want to see tangible results. So it would be good to be able to demonstrate that and to showcase that. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for that. We've got a hand up from Rao Khagala Sobata. Our host will unmute you so you can comment or ask a question. Let's hear from you, Rao Khagala. Rao Khagala, you are unmuted.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Okay. Morning, ladies. Sorry, afternoon, ladies. My question is related to the green technology in our construction industry. I'm sitting here as an event planner with interest in green buildings and wondering, are we ready to embrace the technology? For example, while we are still waiting for the amendments of our codes to ensure that our buildings are green, are we ready to accept the rejection maybe from those local authorities who would be initiative enough to say, can you consider the basics of the green technology? If I'm to say your application does not meet at least the basics for it being green, are you ready to accept, maybe as an architect, Mathe, are you ready to accept that? Or you would say, since it is not in the code, why are you enforcing it? Thank you.
Okay, I can maybe respond to part of that question, and Kagiso will probably respond to the other part. So in 2003, a guideline was developed for what we call passive design guidelines for I'm trying to remember the correct title off the top of my head, but passive design, sustainable passive design guidelines. So in other words, a set of guidelines around how you design buildings, how you design spaces around buildings, and how you design the larger urban fabric using passive energy guidelines. This book showed how, with the existing laws, the existing materials that are approved currently, you would design sustainable building spaces, and the same thinking would then apply to how you develop your urban spaces and you plan your cities and towns and villages. So there's already an existing guideline that shows you how to do it. It's not a law, but it's a guideline that shows how you can do it within the context of what we have. There is no doubt that our environment needs to open up for new building materials, for old building materials in a new context, and I'm thinking of rammed earth in this particular context. So there's, our legislation absolutely has to be changed to allow for experimentation and use of new materials. So for me, this is one of the items that is on our hot list in terms of things that we have to do as a profession. We have to revise our code. We have to revise our planning code, our building regulations code, to catch up with the opportunities that we find right now. And this is where I think as a private sector, we absolutely have to be at the forefront. But I don't think we need to wait for those laws. We have, even within the existing building code, we have an opportunity for buildings to be built on the basis of being research buildings. So building buildings with experimental materials and technologies in order to demonstrate that they actually can function, are habitable, and they are fit for purpose, and they are safe. So that would be my response. Actually, there's nothing holding us back but our own limitations in our own minds, and also being held back, like you say, by planning authorities and building approval authorities that are not aware enough, that haven't got the knowledge that we're trying to share at the moment, and are gatekeepers as opposed to enablers of progression and innovation. Thank you. Kagiso, I'll let you answer the second part.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I agree with you, Sita, on that. And I think we are more ready than we actually think or we can imagine. And I think I just want to say that, you know, materials are only one part that actually would, you know, render a building a green building, if that makes sense. So there is the component of having new building materials that we would have to introduce and experiment and see how they work and get that approved. But I would say that would be 1 out of 10 of the issues that we need to deal with in order to make a building green. So I'm going to give very practical, simple examples of, you know, some of the things that we overlook that would show that actually it is at the tip of our hands. For example, particularly with government offices that are really large, and you know, you find a floor that's like 200 square meters big, and you walk in and the lights are on because you need lighting, the whole artificial lighting all day long. And even that, when that whole space is not occupied and there are only 5 people in that entire space, and yet the lights are on right across the entire room, and the lights are not zoned, and you know, they don't have motion sensors to say, okay, the lights will only go on in a certain part of the room for as long as there's movement in that room. So for as long as the rest of the space is not occupied, the lights will automatically be off. That is something that is already there, and it's not an expensive technology to implement, or even a hard one to access. Things like designing for more daylight to come into a building rather than relying on lighting the whole day. So a lot of this stuff is actually dependent on the way that we design our buildings, more than just the materials that we use for our buildings. So I think that we are ready. So if you look at things like thermal comfort, is a building too hot or too cold? I think the architects would be able to comment on that, that you need more than just building materials to actually attain, you know, the right thermal comfort for a building to function. Another thing is we need to talk more about existing materials, because there are materials that are less harmful than others. There are certain paints that have less gas emissions than others, and it's just a matter of putting it out there and saying, you know, with what we have and with what is approved, this is the best, probably the best practice that we can use in the market. So I hope I'm answering the question when I say that we are actually, we are far more ready than we think we are, although there is some work to be done in terms of building codes and so on, but it's not the type that would hold us back. It's not something that we need to wait for before we plunge in.
Right, thank you for that, Kagiso. We have a question here directed to, you know, I'm gonna let Claire speak, and then we'll go back to a question that's directed at Kagiso possibly. But Claire, can you elaborate more on the law of time and what it is that the current leaders can learn from it to drive the industry post-COVID-19? I'm not sure if Matsiriso Siswaye is talking about leaders within the built environment, or, you know, leaders as in our political leaders. But I'll pass that question on to you, Claire, and then we can go back to Tebogo.
Yeah, thank you, Sita. As I mentioned when I started speaking, leadership actually is universal. It doesn't matter which sector you are in, you have to have leadership skills, and you have to actually apply them according to how, you know, you have to respond to certain things. The issue of timing, I guess, from post-COVID-19 is saying to you, I think Sethebe also touched on it, the issue of how long can you make a decision? Is it possible for you to shorten the time to 3?
Claire, I think you've accidentally muted your mic.
Sorry.
You're back.
Okay. So yeah, as I was saying, the importance of timing is such that everything that we do, Sethebe mentioned it as well earlier on, is it really necessary for it to take 3 days or 6 months or 12 months for decision to be made? COVID-19 has shown us that it is possible to make decisions within a day, even in our Ministry of Infrastructure and Housing Development, where you would actually, in ministries, you would wait for a month to be given feedback on certain things. We have seen that it can actually happen. So for me, when it comes to issue of timing, there are a lot of things that we have to be thinking about. We have to be making decisions very, very quickly. We have to be decisive. We are dealing with unknown unknowns, you know, as they say it. You have to always be agile in terms of how quickly can I make a decision. There is issue of social contracts that we made with our employees, we made with our collaborating partners. We have to make sure that we give information when it is needed, quickly as how it is actually needed. If you are looking for a response as an employee on whether I would be catered for in terms of my salary, you cannot be waiting for a week for somebody to actually be talking to their board members and seeing how those things can happen. If you are looking for a decision to be made on a contract of whether next week you'll be doing construction in Mahalape or in Kasani, you cannot be waiting for a whole month because MTC has not set. So these are the kind of things that we are talking about. As leaders, we have to go back and review our models, our business models, our decision-making models. And I think I like a comment that was made by Refilo earlier on. She talked about issue of everybody having to be a team player. And this now goes back to how well did you develop your people to be team players? How well as leaders did you make your people know that their voice is important? They can actually contribute meaningfully. You allow them to be wrong if they have to be wrong, because at this time we are innovating. We are coming up with new ways of doing things, and there are chances that people can actually go wrong. They may not be, you know, going into it thinking I'm going to propose something that is wrong to my boss. They are doing it because they're trying to be innovative. So you have to create that environment where people are allowed to actually go wrong. Can we wait a week, a month, a year to go digital? I don't think is an answer, a question that I can answer, but I can say to you that the more time you take, the less you're going to be able to be sustainable as an organization. So for me, that is what timing really is to.
Yeah, thank you for that, Claire. So there's two questions, one on the chat, and I think both questions, well, there's two questions directed at Minnacle Academy, and I would ask those two to get in touch with Minnacle Academy directly after this session and follow up. Is Minnacle Academy open to individuals or only to organizations? I'll ask Chanda to just respond to that on the chat. But there was a question here that from Tabuho Mudisa Happy to say the Botswana Green Building Council was launched in 2016. You know, we haven't really felt any impact from, you know, the Botswana Green Building Council since it's launched. And Rory-san goes on to ask, what are the main challenges in green building construction? So to me, these two questions speak to the same issue. One is we are missing some kind of association, institutional support for green building. Do we have that? Is it active? What form is it? You know, is copying a structure from another country into our country, has that worked for us? Is, you know, what aspirations did we have around the Green Building Council, and what is required to take it forward? And what are other challenges in general in terms of trying to get green building values into our construction industry? So Kagiso, I'll hand that to you. Thanks.
I'm really glad that Tebogo has, you know, given some input into that. She is the chairperson of the Botswana Green Building Council, and I've just recently joined them, and I think she also started recently. And we are working hard to get it going. And I think one of the biggest needs for the Green Building Council is endorsement and support in a very practical way from government side, in terms of funding, in terms of policies that we would like to have or see in place. And another thing is wanting to have something like, in the commercial space, people want to have some sort of green rating system. And for us to be able to establish our own, that will take time. And then the question is, okay, then which green rating system do you adapt? So basically the purpose of that green rating system would be to assess a building and say, well, this building meets the criteria or the standards that are required to qualify a building as green, and so on. So I think with the new president, the new chairperson of the Botswana Green Building Council, and just seeing how much work the Boha has done in order to work with other green building councils around Africa, learning from them and seeing what their approach has been in breaking ground, particularly with proper recognition from government and proper mobilization, to be able to fulfill its mandate, one of which is to educate, make people aware, but also to come up with its own green rating system where we can evaluate and assess buildings. Government legislation has to come alongside that. As we've spoken about existing building codes versus new building codes and so on. So that's the first part. Sita, can you remind me of the second part of the question, please?
The second part was just about what challenges in general. I mean, I think if I can lead with some aspects, in my experience as an architect, I hope none of my clients are listening, because often I don't even tell them that they're getting cavity walls, which will perform better than a standard 230 wall as an exterior element, for example. Because I believe that certain things should just be a given at the stage where we are as a society, or, if you're building a 5 million pula house, you really should be able to afford to build, a cavity wall to improve the thermal performance of your space. So I think just one or two quick short examples around the challenges that you face in general in terms of trying to get people to understand the benefits of green approaches to building and construction.
Okay. So I'd break that up into, say, in the commercial space and versus residential space. I think one of the big challenges in the commercial industry or property market is that, people build with one goal in mind, and their goal is, I need to get a structure up, it needs to be able to meet my needs and be functional, and I need to be able to get money from it and spend on it as little as possible. And people often only think of the capital cost, so the cost of actually getting that building up, but don't really put a lot of work into the life cycle costs of that building. And usually that's where you see the benefits of green building construction, is in the building's life cycle and its operational costs. So some of the practices that would enable that building to operate as green going forward would probably be a little bit more expensive than the conventional way of doing things. So that's one of the bigger challenges, is that people are looking at the immediate cost instead of looking at the long-term benefits. So that would be more in the commercial space. And then the other thing is they're looking at what is the incentive then, what is the immediate incentive for developers. They want to build and then they're going to sell. And if having this building as green is not going to make a difference to the value, to the market value of the property, if it's not going to make a difference to the selling price of the property, then why should I even bother? So that's the other challenge that we have. I think in terms of the residential space, that I feel like that's where there's a lot of lack of information. And the difference between the two is that when you're dealing with a commercial building, you have a project team that sits around the table and they go through design solutions and they talk them through. But when you're dealing with a residential building, a lot of people have an informal way of procuring residential buildings. It's usually people who have money to build something like a 5 million Pula house, who will sit with an architect and go through the design and go through a whole lot of technologies in that regard. But generally, a larger part of our residential market is informal, and it's just somebody saying, hey, I need to find a draftsman to design this for me. It's a house, it meets the function of a house, and so then I'm going to find a builder to put it up for me. So formal professional input is very limited in that space, and then that's where information isn't brought to the table for people to make decisions based on good information.
So thanks for that, Kagiso. We have one last question, and Refilo is going to be very upset with me, but I've got a good reason for not answering her question now, because her question is an excellent introduction to what we are going to be covering in one of the aspects that we're going to be covering in much more detail in our next webinar. So, we've talked in very broad terms about the opportunities that are there in terms of transforming into tech solutions, the apps that exist, the software that is out there. We've talked in general terms about, the strength of leadership that one needs to have in order to embrace some of these new things, these new ways of doing anything. I am as much a culprit as anybody else is. I'm always eternally grateful for my younger members of staff, because they are constantly challenging me to say, we can do this, we can do that, you can use this software. So, and, for me, these three aspects that we've spoken about today are intertwined. Embracing technology requires brave leadership, not necessarily just from the older, but also from the younger generation, just saying, oldies, you need to step aside. And it also requires embracing new values around the spaces that we build. Green technology, sustainability, and those kind of issues. So, Refile, to get a detailed answer to your question around what are the platforms that are available and what has been the impact of those platforms currently and going forward, is a beautiful introduction, or what can I call it? An advert to what our next webinar will be. One of our next webinars will be talking about. So I would just like to thank everybody for taking the time to come to today's session. I hope you found it interesting. It is meant as an introduction to larger topics that we face in the built environment. And the women who you have met today, please seek them out. They are experts in their area and are available to consult on a wealth of issues related to what we've been talking about today. So on that note, I'd like to say thank you very much, ladies, and thank you very much to our listeners, and I hope you've enjoyed today's session.
Thank you very much, Sita.